some of the particular letters that, say, Paul writes to Galatians or Ephesians. They give principles for all Christians, but they also sometimes will deal with specific issues of specific churches at specific times. Peter gives a command. He writes to the church as a whole, and he gives this command, 1 Peter 3, 15 and 16. He says, always be prepared to give a defense for the hope that is in you, and yet with gentleness and reverence, setting apart Christ as Lord in your hearts. So there's several aspects of that. The key word in there, the important word in there is this word apologia, from where we get the modern word apologetics, and it means a reasoned defense. So one is that Peter is telling all Christians, you need to be ready to give a reasoned defense of the Christian faith. This term, be ready, is also an important phrase, because what does it mean, to be ready? And I think there's two things that are implied by this. And I think of athletes. I think, say, of a tennis player who's ranked number 1 in the world now. It's not Serena anymore. She just got beat. Who can I mention? All right, Serena Williams. All right, whatever.
Yeah.
She's certainly the best player over the last 10 years. Right, so what does it mean for her to be ready for a tennis match? Or for a volley? I'll suggest two things. One, an awful lot of preparation. For every hour she spends on the court in a tournament, she's spending lots and lots of hours practicing. Sitting and hitting 1,000 forehands, and then 1,000 backhands, and then 1,000 serves. And I think oftentimes when I talk to Christians about sort of preparing for apologetics, doing sort of training, they think, yeah, but won't that make it rote? Won't that make it seem like it's mechanical? My response is, Serena Williams taking 1,000 forehand shots every day does the exact opposite. It doesn't make her mechanical in a tournament. It means that forehand is so second nature that when she's in a tournament, she doesn't have to think about the forehand. She can be thinking about her opponent. Now, in apologetics, the person we're interacting with is not an opponent. It's not an enemy, but it's still someone we need to be thinking about. The second part of being ready means actually looking for opportunities. So for Serena Williams to be ready not only means 1,000 forehands a day and 1,000 backhands a day and 1,000 serves, it also means when she's on the court, she's ready to react, to move one way or the other. She's watching what's going on. So I think there's sort of two aspects that Christians need to prepare and train, and then we need to be looking for opportunities. The preparing and training is something I was just talking about. And it relates to this third thing, always be ready to make a defense for the hope that is in you, yet with gentleness and reverence. So, I think part of this training, part of this preparation means, one, we know what are the big attacks, what are the big arguments against Christianity that have persisted through all cultures and all times. And I think these are things that all Christians should be ready to think about. Why believe in Jesus? What is the evidence that he rose again from the dead? What is the evidence that he's God? What are the big arguments against Christianity that every single culture, every time throughout all of history is raised? Learn what those are and be prepared to answer them. Second thing is a more particular aspect, which is, different cultures, different communities have different issues that are particular to that culture and that community. I work in a science building at Middlebury College. There are, my building is the biology, chemistry, biochemistry, psychology, geology, geography, and neuroscience departments. So that means my particular call to Christian apologetics probably means I have to spend a lot more time thinking about issues of Christianity and science. Other people don't have to deal with that because they're not living in a building where there's 70 scientists who are often hostile to Christianity working. So that would be, what it means for my culture. For what it meant for Paul is he had to know what the teachings of the Athenians were. So he took the time to learn their myths. So he could communicate the Christian gospel to them in the terms of the things that they believed and already knew. So he obviously took the time to learn the myth, the story of the plague. By the way, that's not in Scripture, what I told you. I learned that from a friend who's a classicist. He's an ancient Greek philosopher. He studies ancient Greek philosophy. So Paul did the same thing. He learned that story. And here's what he saw in their myths when he took the time to learn it. What is at the core of that myth? It's a story of people who have offended God, who are saved by the sacrifice of an innocent lamb. That's a pagan myth. Sounds a whole lot to me like God is preparing our hearts for the gospel. Paul took the time to learn that. There's one other myth in Athens, by the way. Who's Athens named after, anyone? Athena, the goddess of justice. And another myth that would have been central to Athens is a story of Orestes. Orestes' father killed his mother, which put him in a really terrible place. Because there's two Greek laws. One, if anyone kills your mother, you have to avenge her. Two, never kill your father. He's in trouble either way. He decides to take vengeance on his father killing his mother, and he kills his father. And so the people of Athens go to kill him. And he runs to the temple of Athena, and he grabs her altar. He says, I appeal to Athena. So Athena shows up. He says, here's what we're going to do. We're going to create a jury. And this is the story of actually the first trial by jury. This is the Greeks' myth of how trial by jury came about. He says, we'll pick 12 of your peers and let them hear the case. So, he gives his case. His prosecutors give their case. And 6 of the people in the jury say, he's guilty. He killed his father. And 6 of the people in the jury say, he's innocent. He avenged his mother. And Athena says, we will proclaim him innocent. Because when justice comes against mercy, mercy triumphs. So that's the other myth. Paul drew out. So he saw the hearts of these people prepared. So there's answers that I think all Christians should know. Then there's the things of our culture. But then there's one other thing which is really important, which is you always have to deal with the individual. Peter Kreeft, the great Christian apologist and philosopher, says, and this is an overstatement, but there's a principle behind it. He says, never answer a person's questions. Answer the person. Now again, he's an apologist. He's really good at giving arguments and defenses for the Christianity. He knows you actually really do answer questions. But he says deeper than answering the questions is dealing with the individual. You can't let your arguments become more important than the person you are reasoning with. This is where the Serena Williams analogy fully breaks down, because the person on the other side of the court is not your opponent. It's the person you are there for. It's the person you want to help. So the example I gave earlier is, I think one of the big attacks on Christianity that Christians should all be prepared to reason with and defend with. It's an ancient Greek argument that precedes Christ. If God was loving, he wouldn't want suffering. If God was powerful, he'd be able to prevent suffering. There is suffering. Either God's not loving or God's not powerful. It's an ancient Greek argument. The atheist philosopher Hume, 300 years or so ago, brought that argument up again. And it was a very popular argument against Christianity for a long time. It continues to surface. C.S. Lewis does a wonderful job in a book-length treatment called The Problem of Pain, dealing with this argument. I think it's the sort of book that a lot of the Christians should read. At least half the people in this room should be prepared to answer that. And read the book, The Problem of Pain, or read someone else's treatment of this book. Be prepared to argue against that. But also deal with the individual. Because if someone comes to you and that really is an intellectual stumbling block, keeping them from Christ, let's clear that stumbling block away by responding to the argument and help open up the door for them to come to Christ. But it also may be the case that that person who's coming to you in anguish about, they may phrase this as an intellectual argument. I can't believe in a God who would allow suffering. If God was loving, he wouldn't want it. If he was powerful, he wouldn't have to allow it. He must either be not loving or not powerful. If that person's just lost their child in a car accident, the last thing that they need is you to sit and argue with them about why pain and suffering exists in the world. You may have a wonderful Christian response to that, but you might win the battle and lose the war. So that's what Peter says. Always be prepared to make a defense for the hope that is in you with gentleness and respect. And one last thing before I go on. I want to talk a little bit about types of reasoning, but I want to look lastly at this case of Pilate, who says, what is truth? So for a long time in the 20th century, the church actually had a period of being anti-reason. I think this sentiment of this anti-reasoning sentiment seemed to have arisen in the church in the late 19th and early 20th century, when the church began to perceive that a lot of scientists and academics sort of were starting to attack Christianity. And the church's response was, if scientists and academics are attacking the faith, then somehow, intellect and reason must be evil things. Let's reject intellect and reason altogether, because these professors and scientists are attacking Christianity. Let's just reject academics and reason and science altogether. So it was a sort of an anti-faith argument. Some wonderful people like C.S. Lewis responded and helped begin to call the church back to learning how to reason, learning how to think about our faith. But that assumes an audience that's interested in reason. So modernity, or we might even say sort of Enlightenment thought, is a description of a period that we really entered into in the 19th and 20th century, where our culture puts tremendous faith in science and reason as the only way to truth. But we actually now live in an age which has often been referred to as post-modernity. In the age of post-modernity, a lot of people have actually seen that science and reason have failed. The world is still full of suffering. And scientists have often used their knowledge simply as a means of power, as a means of technological power, as a means of oppressing other people. So now it's not the Christians, ironically, who have rejected reason and science. But many areas in the world, people have rejected reason and science. They say that there is no such thing as truth. That all truths are equally valid. Believe whatever you want to believe. Now, it's new that this is, in the last 30 or 40 years, that this has been a dominant idea in our culture. But it's actually not completely new, because it's the question that Pilate asked of Jesus. When Pilate was beginning to, I think, be confronted by the fact that he was talking to God, I'd be confronted a little bit if I were talking to God, he says, what is truth? Just like, I don't want to have to deal with the evidence, let's just bring into question the whole idea of truth. So a lot of responses of some wonderful Christian thinkers has been in an area that was called presuppositional apologetics. Presuppositional apologetics gets at underlying worldviews and underlying philosophies. And it's a wonderful way of not providing sort of classical reasoned arguments for people who accept reason that Christianity is true. But it's a way of interacting with people who reject the very notion of reason. And so one of the wonderful thinkers that's really helpful in dealing with postmodernity, presuppositional apologetics, who's really helped influence the church, is Francis Schaeffer. So he's got a series of 3 books. They're slow and hard reading. But if you're really interested in this, I would recommend them. They are called Escape from Reason, The God Who Is There, and He Is There and He Is Not Silent. Another more recent author that might be worth looking at is Leslie Newbigin. He's a more recent Christian apologist. So it's a little bit of a preface to different ways of thinking. What I would like to end, though, is in that middle category, that arguments for Christianity, what's often called classical apologetics. Reasons to believe. At the beginning I said I wanted to say what Christianity says about reason. Hopefully we've given at least an introduction to that. I'd like to turn now and say what does reason say about Christianity. So when I'm talking to Middlebury College students or when I'm giving apologetics training, I would suggest there's actually a lot of different types of evidence that I might point to in terms of evidence for Christianity. I think there is scientific evidence. I mentioned, one of the talks I helped sponsor 28 years ago at Cornell University was a talk on scientific evidence for the existence of God. There is philosophical evidence. There is psychological evidence. I think just actually looking at the human person, what it means to be human, suggests to me that we are made in the image of a creator. There's a wonderful book, an author in the 70s and early 80s, a psychologist, I think at Harvard, and I actually learned later on that he went to Middlebury College for 2 years and hated it and left. M. Scott Peck is his name. And he wrote 2 fantastic books called The Road Less Traveled, late 70s, and The People of the Lie was the follow-up. And M. Scott Peck's study of psychology and actually his recognition that evil was a real category, that we couldn't simply call things psychological illnesses, that there really was moral good and evil in the universe, led him to profess a Christian faith. So I'd suggest there's psychological evidence. I think there's tremendous historical evidence for the truth of the Christian claims. Then there's things like, I guess it's a type of evidence, but it brings together philosophical and scientific evidence. Like the cosmological argument for the existence of God. And in very short, quick terms, I would suggest the cosmological argument is the following. There was a Big Bang, there must have been a Big Banger. Which is a tremendously powerful argument. It has a mathematical form, a philosophical form, and a scientific form. But I think the most important, the one I want to end with a little bit, is the evidence that comes from simply looking at the person of Jesus. Because I think while all of these are interesting and get at aspects of, does God exist? Why is there pain and suffering in the world? What is it, what are the things that would cause us to believe certain things about Christianity? At the core of the Christian gospel, as Paul said in 1 Corinthians, as we put it earlier, is this person of Jesus Christ. Is he God? Did he rise again from the dead? If Jesus is not God, everything you do at this church is a waste of time.
That's right.
If he didn't rise again from the dead, we're wasting our lives following him. I'm fully convinced he did rise from the dead. I'm fully convinced he is God. And that nothing I do in his service is a waste of time. But because that is the central point, I think that's the best place to begin thinking about defenses of Christianity. And so, to me, the most compelling argument that I have heard and dealt with, and that I've experienced in dealing with other, say with non-believers at Middlebury College, even very recently, the form of this argument has a technical name in philosophy, in deductive reason. It's called a disjunctive syllogism, which you don't actually have to remember that name. But I will explain the form of the argument. So I'll explain the general form of the argument, and then we'll look at the particular argument for Christ. The disjunctive syllogism follows the following form. Like a proposition is simply a statement that's either true or false. Like, it's raining outside right now. Middlebury College beat Hamilton College 14-12 in a baseball game yesterday. The Red Sox crushed the Toronto Blue Jays last night, 17-2. Okay. Those are all propositions. They're statements that are either true or false. It turns out, I actually have no idea whether it's raining outside right now, but the second one of those statements was true. Middlebury did beat Hamilton last night, although my son did not get to pitch. The third one was false. I think the Red Sox didn't even play yesterday. Maybe they did. Maybe I'm one day off on the road. I thought yesterday was their day off. Right. So it doesn't. And so a proposition is a proposition. If any statement that can be true or false, it's a proposition. In fact, the point of reasoning is to find out whether propositions are true. So any statement that can be true or false, that must be either true or false, like it is raining outside. The Red Sox won the baseball game last night. I have 3 sons. I have caught fish in every state in the United States. Those are all propositions. So here's how a disjunctive syllogism works. Suppose we're trying to find out whether something is true. You can take any proposition. A proposition, by definition, is either true or false. We might think of 2 paths down a tree. You begin with a proposition. If it's false, you follow that path. If it's true, you follow that path. And then we can continue to break these paths up with further propositions. Okay? So, suppose it might be false. We can say some other proposition. Like I might say, it's raining outside now. If that's false, I might give another proposition. It's cloudy out. So if I get down to this branch right here, it means it's not raining and it's not cloudy. If I go down this branch and get to here, it means it's not raining, but it is cloudy, right? So you can just keep breaking up the world of truths into smaller and smaller possibilities. Does that make sense? So we could also take this branch and break it up. You can say, I think it's raining outside now, and you might say, it is windy. The wind is, let's be more specific, the wind is more than 10 miles an hour. That might be false, or that might be true. So if we're here, it means it is raining and it is windy. Here means it is raining and it's not windy. Here means it's not raining, but it is cloudy. Here means it's not raining and it's not cloudy. We keep breaking things up. And so if we break this up, we'd say, well, there's sort of now 5 different possibilities that we're considering. So a disjunction is simply a way of breaking something up into different possible paths. Now, if what we can do is we want to find out which one of these is true, one thing is you just give positive evidence that one of these is true. But another thing you might do is show that that can't possibly be the case. And that can't possibly be the case. And that can't be the case. And that can't be the case. Or there's strong evidence it's not. And if you can eliminate 4 of the 5 possibilities, and that's the only one left, then that must be the case. It must be that this is true, this is false, and this is false. Because we've eliminated those other possibilities. That's an argument called the disjunctive syllogism. You kind of list a bunch of possibilities. You eliminate several until all that's left is one. And if all that's left is one, that must be what's true.
Sherlock Holmes.
Yes. Oh, well, yeah, exactly. Yeah, it's actually deductive reasoning. Yeah, it's deductive reasoning, right? So if you eliminate everything else, that must be the path. So let's do that. So here, the truth in the example corresponds to proposition 1 is true, proposition 3 is false, proposition 4 is false. How do we know that? Because we can't show that that can't be the case, that can't be the case, that can't be the case, and that can't be the case. Okay, that was abstract, but let's do it in a concrete way with a specific example. Jesus, here's my proposition. Jesus claimed to be God incarnate, the creator of the universe. So I actually want to deal with this proposition simply by specifically arguing that it is true. It is really common in the world today, and I hear this all the time at Middlebury College. College students repeat to me back what their high school teachers have told them. High school teachers who haven't bothered to actually learn what they're talking about sometimes. College teachers do the same thing. I frequently hear Jesus never claimed to be God. That was something that his followers added, the church added 300 years later. He never claimed to be God. So this is a proposition that might be true or it might be false. I'm not asking whether he is God. Okay? I'm simply asking, did he claim to be God incarnate, the eternal creator of the universe? So this isn't, is it true that he's God? Just did he actually claim to be God? Either he did claim to be God, or he didn't claim to be God. And this one I'll just simply argue, not as a disjunctive syllogism, but I just point out, for all the students who say that, thinking they're really intelligent, but have never actually bothered looking at the record, Jesus claimed to be God over and over and over again in every conceivable possible manner that you could claim to be God in a culture of a monotheistic first century Hebrew culture. Some less obvious ones. In John 10, 11 to 18, he says, I am the good shepherd. Actually, by the way, the term shepherd actually is, in Greek, it's just the word pastor. So that's all what the word pastor means. It means shepherd. If you've ever heard of this is a pastoral setting, it means it's a setting where there are pastors. Not pastures, but pastors. We put the pastor out to pasture. Okay. A pastoral setting means this is where you'd expect to see shepherds and sheep. Okay. When Jesus says, I am the good shepherd, though, it's a strange thing for a first century carpenter to say, except in the context that it is one of the most famous metaphors for God in the Hebrew culture. It's still one of the most famous psalms in the world today. The 23rd Psalm, which tells us, the Lord is my shepherd. Right? So, for a Hebrew culture, they knew who the good shepherd was. They know that that good shepherd is God. So when Jesus says that, it's not just a casual, it's not a brand new metaphor that he used to give his own character. It is a metaphor that does tell you about the character of Christ. But it is not a metaphor he invented. It is a metaphor that directly connects him with the most famous psalm in Hebrew literature. I am the good shepherd, right? The good shepherd lays down his life for the sheep. I know the Father. I have the authority to lay it down, the authority to take it up again, he says later on. So this is a really powerful metaphor. First, that connects him with the Lord is my shepherd. I am the good shepherd. The Lord is my shepherd. Oh, that means I am the Lord. And then goes on and says, look, just in case you missed what a powerful claim this is, let me make it clear. This is a claim of authority. I have the authority to lay down my life for the sheep. And the authority to take it up again. So it's also going to be a promise of one of many claims of the resurrection. He also says, I am the gate. That's a strange thing to say. And by the way, anyone, if you ever hear someone say, we must take the Bible literally, the only way to take the Bible is literally, just make sure you correct that really quickly. Because Jesus was not made out of wood. There's a lot of parts of the Bible that we need to learn to take literally. Jesus rose again from the dead. That's not a metaphor. All of our faith falls apart if you try to understand that as a metaphor. There's other parts of Scripture which are really clearly metaphorical teaching. This is one of them. I am the good shepherd is a metaphor. The challenge, of course, is to figure out what in Scripture is the literal teaching, what's the metaphorical teaching, and what are the areas where it's actually maybe hard to understand, and to have grace in those areas. That was a side comment. I am the gate. I tell the truth, I am the gate for the sheep. Whoever enters through me will be saved. So again, this is a metaphor that Jesus is giving, but it is also an explicit claim of divinity. He is claiming the power of salvation. He is claiming not just to be the gate, but the gate through whom you must enter to be saved. Clear claim, right, to have the power of salvation, a clear claim of divinity. One of many. If these were the only ones, you might say, okay, he never claimed to be God. But he claims it again and again and again in sort of every conceivable way, every other breath out of his mouth. Before Abraham was born, I am. And he names himself with the name that God gives himself. When Moses says to God, who are you? What is your name that I can tell the Israelites? And God says, I am. No name, other name that you give me will be a limitation. Let me just tell you, I am that I am. I am the only one who is self-existent. Every other person who ever says, I am, must immediately follow that with a dependent clause. I am because of my parents who got married and did the thing that married people do that results in children, right? Which we can't talk about too much in a Saturday morning in the Baptist church. But I am because of my parents. God doesn't have to say that. He doesn't have to say I am because. He can say I am, period. And that's what Jesus is doing. So he's not only claiming to have been around before Abraham, but he's claiming to be self-existent. He's claiming that with the very name that God gives himself. I tell you the truth. Before Abraham was born, I am. And this they picked up stones to stone him. If you think I'm making this up, if you think I'm sort of misinterpreting Jesus' claim to be I am, the Jews fully understood the significance of that claim. So if you want to know how significant Jesus' claims were, look at the way people responded to them. They understood this as a claim to divinity. They tried to stone him. I and the Father are one. Doesn't get a whole lot clearer than that. Full, right? He's claiming full unity, full sameness, full oneness with the Father. I and the Father are one. Again, the Jews picked up stones to stone him. But Jesus said, I have shown you many great miracles. Why are you stoning me? We're not stoning you because of your miracles, but because of blasphemy. You, a mere man, claim to be God. He claims the authority to forgive sins. And he also claims to be the Son of Man, which was an Old Testament term used in conjunction with the promised Messiah. So he claims the authority to forgive sins, and he claims the title associated with the Messiah. In the famous healing of the paralytic in Mark, he says, but that you may know that the Son of Man has the authority to forgive sins, because he's just forgiven this paralytic's sins. He's just said, your sins are forgiven. And they say, wait a minute, only God can forgive sins. And they're correct. It's so often that we want to make out the Jewish religious leaders of the day to be the bad guys in this story. And some of them were. But actually, they were doing their job. This guy's come along, and he starts saying he's God, and they recognize that. They were wise enough to know that. They're doing their job when they say, only God can forgive sins. They're right. They're absolutely right. Only God can forgive sins. They understood it. And Jesus says, you're right. Only God can forgive sins. But guess what? I'm God. Not me, but that was Jesus. He claims the authority to change names. Who has changed names in the Old Testament? It doesn't happen very often. It's a really big deal. When God comes along and says, to Abram, hey, you're no longer Abram. You're now Abraham. You're now going to be the father of many. Right? When he says to Isaac's younger son, you got a new name, Jacob. You're now Israel. God has the authority to change people's names. Jesus changes his name. He says, I tell you, Simon, son of Jonah, you're now Peter. I'm changing your name. I have the authority to do that because I'm God. He has the authority over the Sabbath. Whose day is the Sabbath? Right there in the Ten Commandments. Honor the Sabbath day because it's God's. God is the Lord over the Sabbath. When Jesus says, I have authority over the Sabbath day, that's a claim for any first century Jew as plain as daylight. He is claiming equality with God. Right? Disciples pick and eat heads of grain on the Sabbath. The Pharisees complain. Jesus responds, the Son of Man is Lord over the Sabbath. And then the Pharisees are looking for a reason to accuse Jesus. They're watching, to see if he'll heal on the Sabbath, because he healed a man with a withered hand. And Jesus saying, you know, what's lawful to do? So there are several interactions throughout Scripture where the main point of confrontation is that Jesus is claiming authority over how he's going to use the Sabbath day. That's the point of contention in several instances between him and his accusers. He claims authority over God's house. Whose house is the temple? It's God's. When Jesus comes in and says, I have authority to do what I want here, the only person with authority to do what he wants in the temple is God. Jesus is claiming again and again and again. It becomes another point of contention. The religious leaders of his day understand that when Jesus is coming in and claiming authority over God's house, he's claiming the authority of God. Right? So when he throws out the money changers, it says, my house shall be, my house will be a house of prayer, quoting God. And he says, get out of here, get these out of here. How do you dare you turn my house into a market? The Jews demanded of him, what miraculous sign can you show to prove your authority? They understood. This is a claim to have God's authority. He claims to be the king of the Jews. The governor asked, are you king of the Jews? Yep, it's what you said. Jesus replied. And then he also claims to be the Christ, or the Messiah, if you want the Hebrew word, the Son of Man, etc., etc. He claims this in many different places. All right, so we could look at several passages where he does this. Okay, so this is the proposition. Jesus claimed to be God incarnate. So here's a disjunctive syllogism about Jesus. Jesus claimed to be the eternal Son of God, the Creator God. Two possibilities. Either he never claimed that or he did. And I think there's tremendous evidence that he not only claimed to be the Son of God, he claimed to be God incarnate, but he claimed it over and over and over and over and over again. In every conceivable way, he claimed that God's day was his day. God's house was his house. God's power to forgive sins was his power to forgive sins. He claimed it over and over and over again. And everybody in his day understood it because they tried to kill him. In fact, they did kill him. So there's two possibilities, right? The claim is true or the claim is false. I think it's obvious the claim is true, but we could break that. It's obvious that he did claim to be God. Now the question is, if he claimed to be God, is the claim true? Because there actually have been lots of people who have claimed to be God. Right? The people who have the airport, who want to shave your head and send you to the airport to collect money, have claimed to be God. Sun Myung Moon, who when I was a teenager, that would have been my parents' fear that I'm going to run off and become a Moonie. Yeah. the Church of the Unification, right? The Church of the Reverend Sun Myung Moon. I think eventually ended in prison, like 20 years ago for tax evasion. Is that right? Okay, a lot of people claim to be God. Jesus claimed to be God. There's no question about that. The question is the claim true? It may be true, it may be false. Suppose it's, right, if it's true, he's Lord. So people don't want to believe that. So they have to say, well, let's say the claim is false then. And now let's do one more proposition. He knew the claim was false. Either that's false or that's true. Right? So here are four possible branches at this point. Either he never claimed to be God at all. We can rule that out for two reasons. One, he was put to death. And the only reason he was put to death is he claimed to be God. But we can also look at all the positive evidence. So I think we can rule that out. Or, he did claim to be God, but the claim was false. In other words, he claimed to be God, but he's not God. And now the question is, did he know the claim was false? So, he claimed to be God, he's not God, and he knows he's not God. He claimed to be God, he's not God, and he thinks he's God. He claimed to be God, he's not God, and he knows that he's not God. Yeah, there we go. He claims to be God, he's not God, but he doesn't know it's false. He really thinks he is God. Claims to be God, he's not God, but he thinks he's God. He claims to be God, he's not God, and he knows he's not God. Or he claims to be God and he really is God. Those are our only possibilities. If he claims to be God, it's not true, but he doesn't know it's true. He really thinks he's God.
Delusional.
He's delusional. He thinks he's been around since the beginning of the universe. He thinks he can forgive sins. He thinks he can rename you. He thinks he can tell you what to do with your life. He thinks he's equal with God. He thinks he can save you. He thinks he's the gate to salvation. Delusional madness. He's insane. Right? So, if he knows the claim, if he doesn't know the claim is false, he really thinks it's true, he's insane. Of course, if he knows the claim is false, then he's an evil liar. He's leading people astray. He's led millions of people astray. It's not like, like a tiny little lie, like, I think that's, I love the color preserve, Bill. Yeah, it might be, it's not like a little lie or something to deceive someone about something important. Well, as we saw actually looking at 1 Corinthians 15, if Jesus isn't God, all of Christianity is the biggest waste of time.
Mm-hmm.
Sure.
He has led hundreds of millions of people astray about the most important issue in life. How can you be saved? What should you give your life to? He's a very evil person. He's doing the work of Satan. If it is not true. So C.S. Lewis, and here's where I just think it's really important, because the most common thing that I hear about Jesus is he's not God, but he was a nice person. He was a good teacher. That's not one of the possibilities.
That's right.
Either he's God, or he's one of the most evil people who's ever lived, or he's an insane lunatic. So C.S. Lewis writes in Mere Christianity, one of those books I highly recommend everybody read. I'm trying here to prevent anyone saying the really foolish thing that people often say about Jesus. I'm ready to accept Jesus as a great moral teacher, but I don't accept his claim to be God. That's one thing we must not say. A man who was merely a man and said the sort of things Jesus said would not be a great moral teacher. He would either be a lunatic on a level with the man who says he is a poached egg, or else he would be the devil. Actually, the first century Jews kind of had a similar idea. At one point after Jesus claims to be God, and they understood that claim, they said, at these words the Jews were again divided. Many said, he is a demon-possessed and raving mad. In other words, they think he's both insane and evil. They're not quite sure which. But they actually understood. They may not have had a nice little disjunctive syllogism term like I had. But actually, and I show this in my book, The Mind of the Machine, they actually had the exact same reasoning. There's places where the language shows the exact same deductive reasoning process that we work through here. Without the chart, but in the same language. So they understood this. They were trained in logic. And so they say, he's a demon-possessed, raving mad. Why listen to him? But others said, you know what? I understand why you think that, because he claimed to be God, but look at him. These are not the sayings of a man possessed by a demon. He is a brilliant moral teacher. The most powerful religious, well-educated religious leaders of the day tried again and again and again to trap him, and couldn't. Right? There's no evidence. Not only is there no evidence of lunacy, but there's evidence of other than this one claim of divinity, there's evidence of one of those sort of sanest, wisest, greatest teachers of all time. So it becomes really hard to accept this as an outcome. Which really only leaves, right, either he's Lord or he's evil. But here's what I'll suggest, and not even counting the evidence of the resurrection. The biggest argument against saying that he was evil. Three. Not one, three reasons. One, when it came to his trial, nobody was ever able to bring a single piece of evidence of moral wrongdoing against him. There was no evidence of someone selfish. Every attempt to discredit him, the evidence fell apart, the witnesses fell apart. At his trial, when it finally came down to it, they said the only thing we could find against him was his claim to be God. Second, he lived a life of tremendous morality. So not only was there no evidence against him in his trial, but you have sort of the teachings of a great moral leader. And then third and finally, and for me the most persuasive, his motivation. He was willing to die for this claim. If Jesus had wanted to go down in history as the greatest moral teacher of all time, or at least up there with, say, the Buddha, or one of these great Chinese teachers, and we've had this great pantheon of the 3 or 4 greatest teachers of all time. All Jesus had to do was one thing: drop that little divinity claim thing. Give all of his wonderful parables about loving your neighbor, turning the other cheek, the meek shall inherit the earth. Just stick with that nice teaching. Live a nice, quiet life. Die a nice, quiet death. And you'll be remembered as one of the great teachers of all time. But he keeps claiming to be God. You know what he gets out of it? Death at the age of 33. The only thing he gains from that is his death. He doesn't even gain followers. In fact, there's a period when it seems like the mobs are beginning to follow him. And then, you know what he does? He starts giving this really hard teaching that turns pretty much everyone away except for 12 people. He turns to Peter and says, "Are you leaving me too?" Because everyone else is left. Peter says, "No, you have the words of eternal life." So, he has nothing to gain from claiming divinity. There's no evidence of any evil. Not only do we have the testimony of 12 people who lived with him 24/7 for 3 years, who were fully convinced of his moral goodness, but the most powerful people of his day were his enemies. Neither of his close... Try to go 24 hours living with somebody, convince them that you haven't sinned. Try to go 3 days living with 12 people and convince them that you haven't sinned. Try to spend 5 days with me backpacking in the Wind River Range, 24/7, eating 3 meals a day with me, and convince me that you're not a sinner. Please try to do that. I beg of you. You won't do it. Jesus had not only 12 people living with him 24/7 who could never find anything morally wrong with him, but the critiques of the most powerful people of his day, desperate to find a moral failure. And then he dies for no other reason than he claimed to be God. And now we're stuck. Right? This is how the disjunctive syllogism works. This is why it makes so many students at Middlebury College uncomfortable. Because once you've eliminated the other 3, this is the only one that's left. And this, by the way, is also why he's so desperate to reject it. Because once you recognize him as Lord, the only response is to be to fall on your knees before him. You must make your choice. Either this man was and is the Son of God, or else a madman or something worse. You can shut him up for a fool. You can spit at him and call him a demon. Or you can fall at his feet and call him Lord and God. But let's not come up with any patronizing nonsense about his being a great human teacher. He's not left that open to us. He did not intend to. And there, it's a good place to end.